Future is undoubtedly one of the top rappers in the game. His iconic auto-tune vocals and trapped out production have had people addicted ever since he came into the game in the early 2010s. And there's one thing at the core of all of his success: the sensational production behind his songs.
Sensational.
So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into all the production techniques used behind Future's best beats and make 2 beats completely from scratch inspired by his most iconic records. The sauce continues to get crazier as the video goes on, so stay tuned, sit back, and get ready to go inside the hard-hitting, dark, and sensational world of Future's production. For the first beat, I wanted to start off with Future's most iconic sound: hard-hitting, dark trap. And to start, we need a melody. So let's go over the keys to making hard Future melodies. The first thing you need is a repetitive and catchy vibe. And the second thing is half steps in the melody. The best way to use these half step melodies is to build a minor chord. So we have a C minor chord right here, and then you copy that over and you just move this note down 1. So a half step is just a fancy way for saying that these notes are right by each other. And you can hear how if we just loop this, it gives off a dark trap vibe. If you listen to these examples, you can hear that the melody is super repetitive, and there's also those half steps in the melody that are giving off that dark trap energy.
Hold up. Wait. Fake nigga lied to a real nigga. That does some shit that you don't do. Yeah, let's put it over.
And one of my favorite instruments that Future uses pretty often is a guitar. Take a listen to the dark, repetitive guitars that you can hear on these songs.
They know they talk that stick talk. They know we talk that lick talk that. Better not get too comfortable.
So that's the vibe I wanted to go for. And to do that, I played this dumb, simple minor to a sus2 chord progression on my guitar, just like the chord progression I was showing you in MIDI earlier. And the reason I played it on my real acoustic guitar instead of a VST is because it has a way better texture, and overall the melody is just gonna come out way better using that. Now, that sounds fine to me, but it doesn't really scream Future yet. Partly because it sounds a bit too plain and normal. It's just a raw guitar recording right now. And if you look back at producers like Metro or people from 808 Mafia, they were using a bunch of plugins like Effectrix and Grossbeat to add these weird chops, stutters, reversing, and just trippy stuff like that to the melodies, like you can hear in these songs.
Yeah.
Having that subtle reverse flipped kind of texture goes a long way to making the melody sound more like a Future type of melody. But today, instead of doing that with Grossbeat or Effectrix, I'm actually going to do it with my upcoming Producer Pedals plugin. So the first thing that I did to flip this was grab my plugin, which by the way looks horrible right now. We haven't even started on the UI, and I added on this reverse delay. So if you listen without it with a little reverb, right? If we add this reverse and the mix is at 100%, it's going to chop it every half bar and reverse it at the same time. And this feedback knob adds in some of the original forward playing. So I turn that down a little bit. Bounce that into audio, chop it a bit, and you get this. And then I reversed the reverse, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but it adds that chopping effect, and now there's just like a subtle reverse texture to it also. Sounds crazy. The last thing I did was pitch it up 6 semitones. Another trick that's used in countless Future songs is half speeding the melody. This instantly gives it way more space and a way more dark ambient kind of vibe, which is perfect for the lower energy sections of the beat. So I took that main guitar that I have on the hook section and half sped it for the verses like this. Next up, something that you can hear in a lot of Future's melodies is some kind of super simple top line melody on a piano or a synth or something like that. Something that plays in a super predictable way, almost kind of putting you in a trance.
Southside on the track, yeah.
Hold up. Wait. Need a script for methazine and some pain pills. I got fame.
So to replicate that repetitive top line, I grabbed the soft bell sound from Sky Keys and put down this pattern. And at this point, to make sure that it's still simple and there's not too much going on melodically, I didn't really want to add any new counter melodies per se, but it did feel like it needed a little something to fill it out. And a great way to add some energy and fullness is to put down a very simple minor to a sus2 pattern like this. Then bounce it to audio and speed it up. The reason that you would bounce it to audio first instead of just speeding up the MIDI in your MIDI file is because warping the audio gives it a way different texture than just simply moving the notes in MIDI. So I took that new synth layer that we just made, sped it up 4 times as fast and pitched it up an octave, which is actually similar to how ATL Jacob did it on High Tech Tech.
Yeah, high tech tech, yeah, big ol'. We driving every single car you want, sending the dog home.
Putting down these simple repetitive melodies and then either half speeding them up, pitching them up is a really great technique for these future kind of melodies. Because essentially, instead of adding 10 different instruments to make an interesting melody, you can just use the same core 3 sounds, and then with time stretching, you can make them feel like completely different instruments that you can use for a hook section, a verse, so on and so forth. And even if you're not just trying to add variation, time stretching the audio gives it so much more of that future kind of sound. So enough yapping, let me A and B it before I sped it up and after I sped it up in the DAW. Next up, I wanted to add an instrument that Future made insanely popular after his smash hit Mask Off, the flute. I love this sample so much, and the reason it sounds so good is because it's an actual real flute. The flute is 100% one of those instruments that you just can't get that texture that a live recording has from VSTs and MIDI. Only problem is, if you don't know how to play the flute or you don't have tons of money to spend on session musicians to play flutes for you, it's almost impossible to get that sound, unless you have something like Melody Mastery. This kit has thousands of live instrument phrases with guitar, original vocals, violins, and of course, some crazy ethnic sounding flutes that'll give you that dark trap future kind of vibe, like these. So if you want to have a huge collection of these live instrument phrases that give off this authentic texture that VSTs just can't recreate, use the promo code Pluto at checkout and you can get a buy one, get one free deal on all my kits. So essentially you buy Melody Mastery and you can get any other kit on my site completely for free. The link will be down in the description for that. So if you've been looking to get any of my kits, you can get 2 for the price of 1 with that code. But anyways, back into the video. So when I was going through the flutes in Melody Mastery, I found this phrase. And although I was going for a Mask Off kind of vibe, it instantly reminded me of another song by Future.
Block, I was posted with demons. You ain't did shit I did. Came off the block, I was posted with demons.
I thought this ethnic kind of flute would work super well for a bridge section. The main section was already kind of busy with that synth melody and the guitar, so I didn't want to put it there and make it too overcrowded. So for the second section, I took out that high guitar and instead used that half-speed guitar with the flute, along with a synth bass line from my Melody Mastery preset bank, and you get this. And like I said earlier with the synths, in these future beats, you want to flip your sounds in audio. So for a little switch up on the beat, I deleted all the guitars, kept all the synth layers, just so the energy feels a little bit different. And then I flipped that flute by doing the same thing and speeding it up twice as fast and pitching it up an octave. And then again, I put my producer pedals plugin on there to add some reverse guitar pedal texture kind of sound, and you get this. And with that, the melody is 100% done. So now it's time to get into those hard ass Future trap drums. When I think of Future's drums, a few key elements come to mind. 1, 808 Mafia. 2, the Spins 808. 3, hi-hat rolls. And 4, a hard ass mix.
Cocaine by the kilo these days, put it right on my wrist. Put this cash up on a new toy. My bitch a prince of cut, little demon in the cut.
So to start off the drums, I laid down a simple trap clap, and I wanted to do some Southside 808 Mafia style hi-hat rolls. And as I was listening back to Southside's beats with Future, I realized that the rolls in his hi-hat patterns are really not as overdone as you see some producers making them out to be. They're not going all over the place and distracting the rapper from being able to get a flow off. So I kept that in mind and put down this pattern. Next up, another thing that's done in a lot of Future's drums is putting an open hat that hits on the one. So essentially, the open hat hits right when all the other drums come in and adds a bunch of impact and kind of a good harshness to the drums.
Cocaine by the kilo, these days put it right on my wrist. That's the way. The ice in this platinum, I did a 180, I went up the wrong way.
So I added a trappy open hat on the one and got this. In most Future songs, his drums have a pretty simple bounce like the one that we have going right now. But one thing we can do sparsely to add a little bit more unique bounce here and there without doing too much is using pauses in the hi-hats and using bounce snares to fill those gaps. Let me explain. So I wanted to add this little bounce snare at the end of the pattern just to kind of transition each 4 bars into each other and add this little memorable moment. And if we have the hi-hat playing all the way through, that little doesn't have the same impact. But if you listen right here, how there's one hi-hat stops as soon as that snare stops, it makes that part of the bounce more exaggerated. Take a listen. Now that we have the bounce of the beat pretty much there, we're missing one of the most important sounds. And we're actually going to use 2 808s in this beat, but I'll get into that in a second. First, I put down this simple punchy spins 808. And once I had that, I wanted to take some inspiration from one of my favorite producers who works with Future, TM88. In a bunch of his beats, he has these super crazy 808 and snare rolls that kind of play off of each other, and it adds such a cool vibe to the production. One of my favorite examples of that being the beat on Big Time.
She went and tatted my name because I'm big time.
And little side note, I actually have a track with TM88 on the same album with Future, which is just really cool. I used to always watch TM88's Instagram live, so it's just still crazy to me that I have a song with him and Future together. But anyways, when you listen to Big Time, you can notice how those 808s and the snares are kind of playing with each other. They're kind of following each other and playing somewhat cohesively. And I find that if you have your rolls conflicting with each other, 808 roll right here, then a snare roll right here, then an 808 roll, and they're not really playing together, it can sound too overdone and jumbled. But when you play them with similar rhythms or have kind of a call and response intentionally, you can get super good results that aren't too complex. All right, so as you can see right here, I've got the 808 up here in the snare rolls that I put in right there. And at first, the snare rolls get busy while the 808 is not doing anything, so it's letting the snare shine a little bit. And right at the end, they kind of pick up together. You can see that right here, they're hitting together. Right here, they're hitting together. Right here, and right there. And this is what the MIDI looks and sounds like. And an essential thing to get these kind of TM88 snare rolls is to use triplets in your snare rolls. So you can see right here, if I draw these in, I'm using the 1/8 triplet right here. And using triplets will definitely get that right bounce. Now that we got the 808 down, I would normally add a kick to finish off the beat, but in a ton of Future's music, there is no kick at all. It relies solely on just a punchy, hard-hitting 808. And taking the kick out of the drums really adds to that ATL kind of vibe that Future is known for. One good example of this is the drums on Riding Strikers.
Strikers good. Yeah.
So in this beat, I'm not going to add a kick and just let the 808 ride. Now that we almost got the drums finished, it's time to talk about the mix. All right, now the drum mix is super important to getting that authentic Future kind of sound. So the first thing you want to do is have your 808 hitting, I don't know, somewhere around 1 to 0 dBs. So you can see right here, it's at like 1.9, which sounded good in this beat. And then another one of the main sounds that you want is the clap or the main snare. You want that to be hitting pretty loud as well so that it locks in the bounce of the beat. Next, we add in the hi-hats. I want them hitting somewhere around like -10, -12-ish. And then with my bounce snare and my snare rolls, I actually take out some of the low end of the snare so that it kind of lets the clap be the full snare kind of sound. And then the bounce snare is just this little accent perk. And then finally, the open hat, you definitely don't want this too loud. I see a bunch of people making the mistake of having the open hats so loud like this that it just ruins the whole beat. So you want to make sure it's not too loud. Same thing with the 808. If your 808 is too loud, people try to get the 808s to knock so hard by turning them up so loud. It ruins the whole mix if it's too loud, right? Obviously, that's very dramatic, but that's still like a lot dirtier than it is right here, but not in a good way. Finally, the last thing I want to show you is this little bus right here. So I have all these drum sounds other than the 808 going to this bus send, which is Fresh Air, which is a free plugin that just boosts the high end and adds a ton more energy and life into the drums. So if we listen without it, and then I turn it on, it's a subtle change, right? And if I turn this up a lot, you could really hear it, right? So you don't want it that intense. You don't need to worry about it being the absolute cleanest mix, because I feel like that dirtiness and harshness adds to that sound that Future has. Just take a listen to Lil Demon.
My bitch a press a cut. Lil Demon in the cut. You mean? Go raid it.
That grittiness and harsh high end is part of Future's sound. And don't quote me on this, I couldn't find the exact interview, but I swear I heard ATL Jacob talking about how when he works with Future, he doesn't send the engineer his stems. He just sends the wave file of the beat and Future just records on that. And that's what gets exported and posted on places like Spotify. The reason he's not letting an engineer mess with his mix is because the engineer's gonna do all the technically right stuff and clean it up, but they want to keep that authentic, gritty trap kind of sound. Anyway, speaking of ATL Jacob, I wanted to add a second 808 to these drums inspired by his work with Future. You can hear in songs like Keep It Burning and For a Nut that he uses this fuzzy, almost soft kind of 808 sound.
Tryna scrape out the paint. One day I was high, had to pour the hoe. I can boss a bitch up for a nut. That little bitty.
And I love that kind of 808. It doesn't really sound like it's punching hard, and there's also no kick with it, and it makes the drums almost feel like they're just kind of floating, which I think is really cool. So without having to find the perfect 808 sample, let me show you how to get that sound super easy. So as you can hear, this 808 has a very punchy beginning, and it has that fuzzy tail that I like though. So whatever DAW you're in, you just want to move the attack on your 808 sample up, I don't know, about 50 to like 80 milliseconds ish. Because if you have it too much, right, the 808 has zero knock or body whatsoever. So you want to do it just enough that it has that kind of soft 808, like floating 808 kind of effect, but it still has a lot of body. And with that, the beat is 100% done. But before I play through the beat all the way, I want to dive into another side of Future's production, a side that I honestly think goes overlooked, the wavy, emotional side of Future. I love Future songs that have these emotional R&B kind of progressions with smooth guitars like the ones that you can hear on these records.
Early in the morning, late at night. Baby, when the sun is out, it's like I'm not myself.
So to start out our second beat, I'm gonna lay down some emotional, smooth chords on guitar. And after looking online at some chord progressions used in songs like Love You Better, Wait For You, Coding Crazy, etc., I found some chords that are often used in these kind of wavy Future songs, and built this chord progression with a piano that I'll later replay on guitar. All right, so the first thing I want to mention is a lot of these emotional Future songs have the kind of chord progression where the bass line is going down like this. Or sometimes it might even be reversed where it goes. These notes right here, a minor chord going down to a major chord, down to another major chord, is a very common progression for this kind of vibe. And right now, it might look a little confusing as to what kind of chords these are. This is because I've inverted the chords, which means that I've simply just moved notes up octaves. So if we take these notes right here and put them down an octave, you can see that all of a sudden it starts to look like a more normal chord progression. So we have a B minor going to an A major going to a G major 7. This chord progression is very simple, but very effective. And one thing that I found, especially with these kind of like painful, emotional kind of melodies, is if you take this middle note of the chords and put it up an octave, it really enhances that vibe. It makes the chord sound bigger compared to this. Once I had the idea of the progression down, I grabbed my electric guitar to replay those chords. And I played this very mid bad take on my guitar, but we're gonna finesse it a little bit. And by the way, I purposefully recorded this guitar at 126 BPM, which is a very slow BPM for the vibe we're trying to go for. And this is gonna help the texture of the sample a lot later. I'll get into that in a bit. Anyways, once I had that, I played the same exact thing again, but this time with acoustic guitar and layered those two together to make it sound a little bit more thick. Once I had that, the foundation was set. And I wanted to take some inspiration from one of my favorite sound combos that you can hear on these records, guitar and vocals. I love this sound combo. It's just classic and it works. But instead of just dragging in a pre-made vocal sample, I wanted to make something custom that perfectly fit the vibe that I was trying to go for with this melody. And if we listen to a few more examples, one of my favorite things about Future's vocal samples is that you don't even really hear words being said by the vocal. It's like it's saying nothing, but the emotion and vibe is being portrayed through the melodies that they're singing. And one reason I think that's so good is because it gives Future the room to write his own song and not be limited to what the vocal sample is talking about. But also, I feel like it gives the production a more abstract, artsy kind of vibe. Take a listen.
She told me she was an angel.
So with that in mind, I wanted to draw some inspiration from a few more guitar and vocal Future songs. First, I always love the dark, haunting, and powerful vocals that you can hear on Accepting My Flaws. And I also love how the vocals on Lost My Dog sound like they're kind of falling. So I wanted to combine the melodic kind of feeling of Lost My Dog with that big, painful ambient sound of the vocals on Accepting My Flaws. And to get the sound that you can hear on Accepting My Flaws, you need layers. So to start off, I put down this super simple melody with my voice over those guitars. Now my vocal is definitely not cutting it, so don't worry if your vocals don't sound great either, because I'm going to show you how you can finesse it. The first thing you want to do is manually pitch correct the vocal, which is different than auto-tuning it, because auto-tune adds that robotic auto-tune kind of effect. And most of the time, you don't want that in a vocal sample. So if we go in here on Logic and you go into the Flex menu, you can grab this Flex Pitch option right here, which is essentially like a free version of Melodyne. And I'm pretty sure in FL Studio it's called New Tone. Don't quote me on that. As you can see right here, everything is like perfectly on the grid as far as like notes are concerned. But if I set it to my original pitch that I had sung it at, you can see that all of a sudden there's some notes here and there, like this one, that needs to be put perfectly in key. So if you move these notes in key, it will not give it as robotic of a vibe as auto-tune. So anytime I see a note like this, that's flat, that I came in too flat, I'll just put that right onto perfect pitch. And I do that on every single layer of the vocals. Now that we have the vocal all tuned, it's time to add layers and rinse and repeat that manual tuning strategy. So I recorded multiple layers, some doing the same exact melody, some doing the same melody but an octave up, as well as a few that are some harmonies of that melody. And finally, I added a little ad-lib riff that's just kind of playing off of those melodies, but it's not directly copying those melodies. And all together, you get this. So obviously this doesn't sound crazy yet. And normally I would send this idea off to a vocalist and have them re-perform it and knock it out of the park. But today I wanted to show you how you could do this even if you can't afford to be paying vocalists every time you have an idea that you want replayed. So what I'm gonna do is actually AI convert my voice into a female voice because I feel like it will fit a lot better in this melody. So what I do is I essentially just stem out my vocal a little bit. So I have all of the vocal layers in one audio file. I'll just export it like this. Then I go to the site kits.ai, which is super fire, and I just drag in this right here. And then I can go right here and browse the voice models, and I chose this one right here. Just click on that and it'll convert your audio into a female voice. And right here you can even go in the settings and put it to auto, and it'll make the pitch detection better so it sounds smoother. You can add a bunch of effects, all this kind of stuff. Download that once it's done. So after adding some EQ to clean up the vocals, some reverb, and some delay from my plugin, this is what the female vocals sound like. Now that we got the vocals converted to a female voice, if you remember earlier, I talked about how we purposefully recorded everything at a slow BPM to enhance the texture. Similar to how I talked about flipping the audio files in the first beat, when you speed up audio files, it adds this kind of warped kind of texture to the audio. And you can hear this kind of effect on the vocal super clearly in Back to the Basics. So I sped up our whole entire project to 166 BPM, added a bunch of reverb to make the vocals ambient, and this is what you get. Now, one thing I also like on Back to the Basics is there's a B section of the vocal. So it's not just the same exact 8-bar loop over and over again. And to get that B section effect without having to record and come up with brand new melodies for a B section, I use that same reverse delay effect from my plugin on those vocals. So to make the B section of the vocals, I bounced all the vocals into one file like this. And then I added on my plugin again with that same reverse delay setting and just chopping and reversing it. And you can also mess with the filter in here, right? So I wanted the B section to be more like ambient, filtered out. Add a few little chops here and there. And you get something like that. The melody is close to finished now, but I just wanted to add a few more elements to fill it out. First one being some kind of ambient key or synth to give off that ambient Hendrix album vibe.
I don't wanna sound like I'm being rude with you.
So I took that MIDI that we originally made on piano to start out this whole melody and put it on an electric piano instead that has a little bit more of a gentle ambient tone. And then I filtered that and drowned it out in reverb to get that really ambient Future vibe. And finally, I wanted to add one more chord sound to add a little bit more bite and body to the chords. And I thought the perfect sound would be a drunk, detuned piano like you can hear on these records. I love the tone of the piano on Perky's Calling especially, and at least to my ear that sounds like a real piano. So I ditched the VSTs for this part and I went over to my real acoustic piano in my studio and played those same exact chords on my piano, and then I added some detune and processing to make it feel more warped and drunk kind of sounding. And now we have all the elements of the melody finished. So I wanted to sauce up the texture of the melody as a whole. So when the whole melody is done, it sounds like this. Which sounds great already, but I wanted to enhance the vibe and make it sound a little bit more warped, just weird. So the first thing I did was add this plugin called Wavy, which is actually a noise reduction thing that you would normally use to get rid of like background white noise and stuff. But something that I've been doing recently to get this like weird degraded audio sound is to put a noise remover on your sample itself. And for the noise profile, instead of like a white noise, you would just use the sample itself. So without it, you hear everything clearly. And then with it, you see how it kind of like takes away some of the quality of the audio. I feel like it makes it sound a little bit more sampled. After that, I added Decimort, turning up that preamp knob to turn up the volume and also cutting out a little bit of the high end. So you can see that's a big difference in volume. Then I added a shaper box. I got the demo, so I don't have the preset, but essentially I put a little side chain to kind of give it a chopped sampled vibe. And I added fresh air to boost some of the high end. And finally, to really get it louder, I added on the UAD LA2 compressor. And then the last thing I did was pitch the sample down 4 semitones because this is going to give it, again, more of that warped audio kind of sound. It's also going to make it darker. And I feel like a lot of these Future songs are kind of dark feeling. And this is the final sample. Finally, I added a live bass from Scarby Rickenbacker and a synth bass, which you'll hear later on in the beat. But for now, it's time to finish this one off with the drums. And one thing I notice is oftentimes on these R&B Future kind of songs, the producers combine these wavy R&B melodies with some more trap-leaning drum sounds. And I feel like this really helps to keep it in that world and aesthetic of Future's production. A good example of this are the drums on one of my all-time favorite songs, My Collection.
I cooked it up and then I went global. My baby mama put.
You can hear that reverbed out trap hi-hat that fits super good in this beat. So I grabbed a similar sound for our hi-hat and put down this slow hi-hat pattern. Once I had that down, I wanted to take some inspiration from 2 things that the drums do on Wait For You. First being the faster 2-step hi-hat that kind of moves from left to right. You might need headphones to hear this. And the second being a more live snare kind of sound. Not 100% a live snare, but it's not too harsh and trap feeling.
Yeah, I've been trapping around the world.
So first things first, I found a nice snare. And then instead of just adding more hi-hats to the pattern that I had just created, I used 2 layers of the same hi-hat sound. All right, so as you can see, we got the slower hi-hat up here, and I have it panned to the left a bit. And if we look in the MIDI, you can see that these are quarter notes. So a normal 2-step hi-hat MIDI would look something like this. But instead what I did is I put those little 1/8 notes that come in right here on a different track and panned those to the right. And I'm gonna exaggerate this a bit more than I actually did in the full beat so you can really hear it, but it gives the effect that the hi-hats are moving left and right. Once I had that down, I added in a bounce snare and a kick to get the main bounce down. This is solid, but to spice these drums up just a bit, I wanted to go back again to Back to the Basics and take some inspiration from those drums. If you listen, you can hear these really cool live hi-hats that are giving a unique bounce to the drums. So to get that sound, I grabbed a live hi-hat loop from an upcoming kit that I'm working on, Drum Mastery. And I chopped that hi-hat loop up and played it super sparsely in the pattern. I just wanted to really accent little parts of the pattern to add a little bit more flavor here and there. Then I also added a live sounding open hat, and you get this. Finally, for a B section, I added a softer rim shot instead of that snare so that when the harder snare comes in, it has more impact and it just gives the beat more of a ride. And you'll hear that rim in the finished beat that I'll play in just a second. But real quick, if you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so that whenever I post one of these videos, you get notified. But anyways, let's dive back into that first hard-hitting track. Quick reminder before you leave this video, if you want any kit of mine for free, just use the code Pluto at checkout when you grab Melody Mastery and you'll get that buy one, get one free deal. Link will be in the description for that, but that's all I got for you today.